Hola amigos, bienvenidos a las charlas de Ático. Hoy tenemos el placer de estar hoy aquí con Anthony Bale, historiador y escritor británico. Ha sido catedrático del Birkbeck College de Londres y ahora es catedrático en Cambridge, donde es miembro del profesorado del Girton College. Ha sido también presidente de la New Chaucer Society y actualmente es beneficiario de una beca Leverhulme. Además, desde este año pues es miembro de la Academia Británica y bueno, pues ha colaborado y ejercido la docencia en multitud de instituciones a ambos lados del Atlántico, incluso del Pacífico, entre las que destacan, pues, por ejemplo, la Universidad de Harvard, la Huntington Library o la Universidad de Melbourne. A su vez, pues también ha sido persona a cargo de multitud de exhibiciones sobre múltiples temas y hoy bueno, pues vamos a estar hablando aquí sobre todo sobre Guía de viajes por la Edad Media. Su interés sobre los viajes medievales data realmente desde el momento en que hace su máster, sobre todo enfocado en lo que es Jerusalén como centro de peregrinaciones medievales y desde entonces pues, bueno, pues, ha tenido una carrera sobre todo en este sentido. Ha traducido, por ejemplo, los viajes de Sir John Mandeville al inglés moderno, también ha hecho lo propio con los viajes de Margery Kemp, ha investigado, por ejemplo, sobre Rodas como centro de comunicaciones internacional en lo que es la Edad Media y además pues, su próximo libro pues, es sobre brujería en la Edad Media. Pero bueno, hoy sobre todo vamos a estar hablando pues, de este libro maravilloso, Guía de viajes por la Edad Media, que sale el próximo lunes 29 de septiembre en librerías, así que bueno, pues es un verdadero viaje al pasado en el que nos vamos a poner en los ojos de los viajeros de la Edad Media para encontrar pues, un mundo extraño, maravilloso, repleto de fantasía, pero también de realidad y sobre todo pues, viajeros que, aunque parece que son muy distintos de nosotros, en realidad vamos a ver que se parecen mucho a la experiencia que podemos tener hoy en día como turistas, como viajeros, como peregrinos. Y bueno, pues después de esta introducción, primera pregunta obligada, puesto que estamos en Madrid. Bueno, eres familiar del único, del inimitable Gareth Bale.
Very distant.
Okay. Yeah, so where does your interest from like the Middle Ages and traveling in the Middle Ages come from? Were you maybe like the kind of child that dreamed of being Marco Polo or having like a time machine?
Wow, that's such a good question, and it's really hard for me to explain all the different influences and the different streams that led to me being who I am today. When I was a kid, there were two of my favorite places to visit near where I grew up. I was born near London, but I grew up near Manchester, and there was a ruined castle in the countryside near the village where I lived. And this castle had been very, very big and important in the Middle Ages, and now there were just a few walls and a few ditches and not much else there. And this was just magical to me to think of the people and the power and the importance of this place reduced to nothing. And my school teacher, she would go out at the weekends as an archaeologist and look around there. And she found cannonballs, she found bits of jewelry, she found, this kind of thing. And this was just wonderful for me to think about the traces that people from the Middle Ages left in the village I was living in. And then also nearby was a big, quite famous country house called Little Morton Hall. It's worth looking it up on the internet. It's a very, very beautiful place. And it's a big black and white 15th century building. And it had, we used to go there a lot as a family. And it had two things that I particularly loved. One was a gallery for walking up and down when it was raining. Rains a lot in the north of England. And this gallery is nearly 100 meters long. And this was built for people to go walking. And I love that idea of what did people do in their spare time? What did people do in their everyday life? And also it had a dog kennel. And this was a medieval dog kennel. And I just thought this was magical that people were recognizable. They had pets, they cared for animals, they had a kind of everyday life. And I think these influences, you can see them in this book, that I'm interested in thinking about what made people do things in the past, what made people's daily lives complete, how did they experience their world. So that's the kind of childhood influence. Also, I was very fortunate to grow up with parents who believed in travel. They always took us on very strange holidays to unusual places.
Like an example, which was like the most strange one.
Well, my dad was a geographer. He was a historian of, a kind of a geographer of the history of sport.
Oh.
He was interested in sport. And we would often go to sites where they're connected to sport.
Yeah.
So, well, the most interesting one was going around Berlin and Prague in 1990, just after the revolution there, and seeing the Olympic Stadium in Berlin and the amazing kind of communist era, enormous things in Prague, and so really incredible places. I remember when I was about 6, we went on holiday to Biarritz, and we spent the time going round pelota courts and looking at the Basque pelota culture, which my dad was interested in. So we would do very strange things. Wow. This opened my eyes to the enormous world out there as a young kid, and I was very lucky to have that. At the same time, I think my dad did have a very big influence on me because his study was full of atlases, maps, books about the world, and he also made maps for his own work. So this made me then very aware of these issues around the perspective we have when we look at the world and what the world looks like from different positions. When I then went to university, I did my first degree in English in Oxford, and I then became very interested in medieval writing. I'd never studied things like Chaucer and Dante before, and this was a revelation to me. It was really wonderful. And then I carried on, did a master's in medieval studies, and then a doctorate. And I've never stopped studying. Basically, I'm still a student at 50 years old. But I keep on. I mean, the thing that keeps me writing and thinking is not that I want to know everything, but is that I know I can't know everything, and there's still so much more. Constant surprises, constant information, amazing material.
It's also like quite kind of a medieval idea. Like you cannot grasp the world, only God can grasp. We as humans can, although we can, but not everything. So that's also like. And
the life is short and the craft is very long, and you have to spend your time on a constant journey towards development, not.
Homo viator.
Yeah, exactly. Not success. So I'm always learning, and I keep myself interested in my work by challenging myself by writing for different audiences, writing in different genres. I've done academic monographs, academic articles, translations, editions, sometimes doing collaborative projects, sometimes just writing a blog, and then sometimes writing for a more general audience. And I think that keeps you thinking, what am I doing? What are the different aspects of this? How can I approach this in different ways?
Well, but you are also like a member of Cambridge, and you've also been like to Harvard, which are like, I would say, two of the greatest cultural institutions. How are they different? Which one do you prefer? Well, of course, you are nowadays working in Cambridge, so maybe.
I mean, Harvard is a wonderful institution. I had a fellowship there a few years ago, and like Cambridge in England, Harvard it's set up to help people work and think. It's an entire scholarly community of ideas. Mainly at Harvard, I was working in the library and just having that space to think, to concentrate. In the modern world, it can be very hard to concentrate, to find the quiet in your mind to actually focus. In Harvard, I found it very easy just to go to the library at 8 o'clock in the morning and then spend the entire day there and work. And I met some wonderful people there. It's the difference, I guess, between an American elite university and somewhere like Cambridge is that it has so much money. And then they have so much money for kind of art and sports facilities, and the campus feels very, very well cared for.
Like in a film, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas, Cambridge also is a very lovely place to be, but Cambridge is it's a state institution. It's a very historic institution, a medieval institution originally. Cambridge is a small town. Harvard is connected to Boston, whereas Cambridge itself is a very small town. So Cambridge feels very, very much like a university city. It's, I guess, it's more like Salamanca, or a small medieval city with a very big university in the center of it. Yeah. And I'm very, very fortunate to be in Cambridge. I love it there. Cambridge is a collegiate university, meaning that there are, I think, 30-something colleges that make up the university, and each one is very, very different. Yeah. The college is where you spend a lot of your time. It's where you talk to your colleagues. It's where you eat. It's often where you socialize.
Do you row against your colleagues?
No. It's not. I mean, I'm too old for that.
Okay.
But mainly, I think Cambridge is this wonderful community of scholars, and in the air there are ideas, and so it's also a very good place to work. Cambridge has a superb library, the University Library, the Cambridge University Library, which is a very large building in the centre of Cambridge, and the books are on the open shelf. Most of the books are on the open shelf, so you can browse the shelves and make discoveries, and that's a very, very important asset in Cambridge, that you have this library that is really one of the best libraries in the world, and it's there for you to play in. I'm like a child, I just I want to run around inside and see everything. So and of course in Cambridge the students tend to be very good, and they're very interested in their subject, and they're there because they want to study and they want to learn. So yes, Cambridge is a great place to be. I live in London still. I spend my time between Cambridge and London.
That's also a good place to be.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived in London since I was, I don't know, a very long time, since 20-something years. So it's my city. Yeah. Okay.
So your city, now let's talk about your book.
Okay.
Yeah, so why are the readers going to find so interesting, so delightful, like a travel guide to the Middle Ages? Why should they be reading this book?
The book is, I think, a surprise. Yeah. It tells a very different version of the medieval world from the one that people might know from something like Game of Thrones or Robin Hood. It describes a world which has some similarities to our world. It's a connected world. It's a globalizing world which connects Western Europe to the Far East. And it's a world where people are concerned about many of the things that we are concerned with: money, status, clothes, food, sex. These medieval people are, in some ways, very similar to us. The book is subtitled that it's something through the world seen through the eyes of medieval travelers, and so the point of the book is really to allow medieval travelers and their own accounts. I spent a lot of time gathering medieval texts and medieval witnesses to travel, and giving those travellers the space to speak in their own words about their experiences. I think lots of their voices are very surprising. They have strange and sometimes crazy experiences. There are female travellers and male travellers. There are poor travellers and rich travellers.
Which is like the most strange or quickest experience that you talk about in the book?
The strangest experience. I mean, there are lots of strange experiences.
Well, we want to hear them all. Well, not all, because
but then you need to
we
read
want
the book.
To read the book.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the book is structured. The first half is more like a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and the second half then goes off into Asia and Africa and beyond. And the most surprising thing to me, and I think to many readers, will be the number of European medieval travellers who went very far beyond Jerusalem, sometimes as far as Sumatra or to China or Mongolia, Ethiopia, and that the world was really not as small as we might think it is. One of the stories that I kept on thinking about was the story of Geronimo di Santa Stefano, who was a merchant from Genoa, and he went to India in the late 15th century and had an absolutely terrible journey where everything went wrong. And at the end of this journey, he went to the Maldives, the islands in the Indian Ocean, and he was detained there for 6 months. And when he finally was able to leave, his boat fell apart, and he was left in the sea clinging to a piece of wood all night. And he survived. Another boat came and picked him up and took him off to India. But that image of somebody from medieval Genoa being in the Indian Ocean all night, so far away from home, must have been so alone and scared and maybe full of regrets about what he'd done. But I think many of us, this is an extreme example, but many of us, when we go on a journey, when we start to travel, there's a point when you think, why am I doing this? What was the point of this? When things go wrong, particularly, when the train is delayed or when the plane is cancelled or something, you think, should I just go home? And I think he must have felt a very extreme version of that in the Indian Ocean there. But all my travellers, I think, they give you a sense of themselves. And travel writing is a very important resource for a medieval historian because it's one of the few places where people talk about themselves. Medieval writing is often impersonal. It's often, it looks back to previous authorities. It's often anonymous, whereas travel writing, you get a sense of what was this person doing in a particular place and time, and what did they think about it? How, and then you also learn about what you might call the technologies of the self. That it's the things about food or clothing, language, how people presented themselves. That often comes out in travel writing. There's one of the pilgrims I've spent a lot of time working on is the English pilgrim Marjorie Kemp. She's an amazingly unstoppable character. She was the mother of 14 children who, in the middle of her life, she had a kind of spiritual crisis or conversion, and she dedicated herself to crying and to conversations with God and to traveling, to pilgrimage. And there's a really nice part of her book where she is in Italy and she meets a patron called Margaret Florentine who looks after her and gives her money and food. And Margaret Florentine says to her, because Marjorie Kemp doesn't speak Italian and Margaret Florentine doesn't speak English, and Margaret Florentine says to her, Margheria in poverté, and Marjorie says back to her, yeah, madame, grande pauvreté. And they're speaking this kind of English, French, Italian lingua franca that they can both understand, and it's a really nice moment of connection between them, and thinking of how we do that. Yeah. You know, when last night, I went to go and get myself an ice cream in Madrid. I had to kind of speak in this kind of broken Italian Spanish and say, and just order what I, and making yourself understood as a traveller is a very, very...
you need to.
You need to, but it could also be very embarrassing. It can also be very dangerous. Yeah. If you can get it wrong, and sometimes it can give you that feeling of where am I? And total dislocation, which lots of my travellers write about, that they find themselves in situations they don't fully understand or they can't understand, that they're very far from home, and they're learning about different peoples, different religions, different cultures. So travel opens the mind, I think, but in very unpredictable ways. Sometimes it can be about not in the ways you expected. It doesn't necessarily make you a better person, but it can surprise you and challenge you.
Yeah, and also I think the way medievals look at traveling, at why was traveling important or not important, kind of gives us information to think about if travel was worth it or it's not worth it, because I think travelers in the Middle Ages, they felt that they couldn't travel as just for the sake of travel, not for enjoying the journey. They had to travel for something. So what do you the way people in the Middle Ages saw travel? Tell us about what travel means and if it changes us as people or it's not worth it.
Yeah. Most people didn't travel for leisure because leisure is a product of having too much time or money, and most people in the Middle Ages didn't have that in Europe. But you can see elements of tourism, of people traveling for curiosity, people traveling for pleasure, and that also travel is a way of giving yourself an alibi of getting away and being somewhere else, of changing your life in some way. For Marjorie Kemp, I think that's one of the attractions of pilgrimage. It's a way of becoming a new person elsewhere. The main motivation for travelling in the Middle Ages was pilgrimage. And so it was for an indulgence for your soul, or for sickness and health as medicine, or maybe you could be told to take a pilgrimage because you committed a sin or a crime. That was also quite common. And I think probably well over half of the travellers that one would encounter in the Middle Ages were connected to pilgrimage in some way or another. But there were also lots of people travelling as merchants, people travelling for profit, to find new markets, to sell things, and that might be very long distance travel to the Holy Land or to the Black Sea or across the Silk Roads. Don't forget that all the spices, all the silks, all the kind of these very common commodities in medieval Europe came from Asia, and these would have required attorneys, merchants, agents, people connecting that chain of the Silk Road all the way from Lisbon to Java. So that's a kind of another structure of travel. People traveled too as diplomats, as ambassadors, as spies, and connected to military reasons. And then people also travel in a more philosophical way, which the book is informed by, in terms of traveling in the mind, of imagining the world. And all travel writing is there to help the people reading it imagine another world. The people who didn't take the journey, either the people who are reading about the journey or the people who might take the journey in the future. And so lots of travel writing asks us the question, what's the truth that we discover in travel, particularly for pilgrimage? The ideal pilgrimage, you leave your home, you go to the object of your pilgrimage, you receive the blessings of the pilgrimage and you're transformed. You become different. And then you come back with the benefits or the moral improvement of that journey. There's lots of skepticism about this, about whether this is true, particularly for the pilgrims who are then distracted by having fun or meeting new people or having a holiday. And there's a theme running through medieval travel writing and running through my book is, what are we looking for when we travel, and what's the truth or value of our travels? If we merely take ourselves and come back as ourselves, what was the point? There's a nice moment towards the end of the book where another incredible traveller, Felix Fabry, who was a German friar, he returns back to his monastery in Germany after a very long journey, and he talks about his beard, subject close to my heart. And he has grown a beard as a traveller, and he says a beard is a natural ornament for a man's face. It makes a man look more handsome, and it shows his journey. It's a sign of his long journey. He's been away for so long, he's grown a beard. But then he has to shave it off, or he decides to shave it off. He's going to re-enter normal life. He's going to become the man he was again. And he's clearly aware that when we travel, we take on these transitional identities. We become liminal. We become someone slightly different. We expose ourselves to different worlds. And whether we are open to them or not depends on the traveller, I think. But I like that awareness that lots of my travellers show of how travel touches your identity, how it can change you, but often in ways that you didn't expect. It opens you up to new experiences, but not necessarily the ones that you wanted to have.
Which is like the most unexpected change undertaken by a traveller?
I suppose a very pessimistic answer to that is for those travellers I write about who die on their journey. That this is a big difference between...
Many of them died, or...
Many of them died. And that was...
So when you were leaving home, you were expected to come back or not?
No, not at all. You should arrange all your business, pay any debts, and make a new will. And this was a kind of, a kind of procedure, a formal process for people. And also there were particular prayers for going on a journey, which were about wishing you well. And people would maybe carry a ring or a badge of St. Christopher, or a patron saint of travel.
In the military or...
Something that would help them travel well. But many travellers died. Some of them, I think, so they maybe did expect that. Some of them, if they were taking a pilgrimage, to die near Jerusalem or to die in Jerusalem was considered actually the best pilgrimage. Your soul was in Jerusalem, so
you were to pilgrim there, so
you were closer to God. But I think perhaps the biggest surprise for many of the travellers was actually the Holy Land itself. They had been educated through religion in imagining Jerusalem to look like Europe and to be a Christian city. But after the 1190s, when the Crusaders lost Jerusalem, Jerusalem was largely a Muslim city, and it was a very alien environment for many of the travellers. But it wasn't just that it was Islamic, it was also that it was very hot, very expensive. They found it very dirty. They found it very strange food, strange clothes. So something that they thought about a lot through the Bible and through their prayers, and was an object of intense longing and desire, was actually very alien and very hostile in some ways to them. The pilgrims, when they land in Jaffa, which was the main port for Jerusalem, lots of them express a combination of joy and great disappointment that no one told them it was going to be like this. And many of them are kept on the beach at Jaffa for quite a few nights while they have to do the paperwork to show that they have paid the right amount of money and that they've confirmed their identity. And the whole process is that this isn't their land, this is someone else's land. And they are made to feel like they are strangers and visitors there, and everything costs money. They complain. It's very common in medieval travel writing for people to keep lists of expenses because they are asked to pay for every single thing. And this again is something I think it connects across time. The moment you arrive in a foreign country you've never been to before and you try and get a taxi, or you have to buy a train ticket, or you go and buy your first drink, you don't know how much anything costs, and the exchange rate is different, and you're very susceptible for people to cheat you. And this is kind of how I think a human connection about how my pilgrims they behave when they're in the Holy Land, and also on the way to the Holy Land, but particularly in the Holy Land. One more answer to your question about transformation. I'd say a few words about Afanasy Nikitin. He was a Russian traveller, a merchant, from the city of Tver, not far from Moscow, and he travelled first to Armenia and Azerbaijan as a merchant, and then into Persia. And his journey took him to India, where he became a kind of independent traveller. First, he did a lot of curious travelling as a kind of merchant and sex tourist. He talks a lot about prostitution in India, and he has his recommendations about that. But then he actually becomes a Muslim. Possibly he was forced to convert, but he seems to have actually started to live as a Muslim. He learns the local languages, and he spent a lot of time there. And he's an unusual case, but he really kind of stopped being his former self. And he actually talks in his account of his journeys about how he started to forget the days of the week, and so he didn't know when the festivals like Easter were. Yeah. So he was losing the mental structure of being himself, and started then to follow an Islamic calendar and the local customs. And again, there's a character in modern life of the person who goes to Thailand or to India and
go there.
Loses their personality, loses their identity as a Westerner and goes native. And you can see an early version in that partially in Nikitin. He does come back to Europe, and he kind of refines his old identity. So I think, in lots of the stories I write about, there's an element of travel telling people something about themselves, and them learning something about themselves. And often that's a quite chaotic process. That's a quite surprising process, even for them.
So did people travel a lot in that flat earth of them?
Okay, so they didn't believe in the flat earth. That's the first thing I need to say.
No, I know.
They knew the world was round. They just didn't know how to get all the way around it. Yeah. They did travel a lot. They traveled a lot more than I think most readers will expect. They traveled to many more destinations than people will expect. They traveled from all over the world. They traveled from Iceland, from Ireland, from Scandinavia. They traveled from across Europe, and I think many of them wrote about these journeys or left records of these journeys in ways which as I was writing the book, kept on surprising me. I kept on finding more and more material, which is great for a writer. You always want more than you can manage. The kinds of writing that people leave, sometimes it's a kind of diary of a journey, sometimes it's a guide for future travelers around practical information. Sometimes this is playful and ironic writing, like Mandeville's Travels, which is incorrect or inaccurate or ironic. The kinds of writing they leave are also very, very rich. I think we need to rethink later medieval Europe as a place of constant mobility, and particularly in cities like Venice, Genoa, Barcelona, which were built around maritime travel. And those cities were part of a network of the big trading cities of later medieval Europe: London, Paris, Bruges, Augsburg, Cologne, Bordeaux, Marseille, Prague, these kinds of places, which were, which, as well as connecting trade, they also were there to connect pilgrimage travel and other kinds of travel and everyday travel.
Like, for example, Santiago was a hub, like, for pilgrimage. I would say it was one of the most important, like, destinations.
Yeah. So the three most important destinations were Jerusalem, Rome, and Santiago for pilgrimage, and they were the three great pilgrimages. This became the kind of top tier of pilgrimages in the later Middle Ages. And of course, then that supported other kinds of industries around food and lodgings and transport, and also the places on the way to that. So all the different places on the Camino to Santiago then became wealthy based on that. And La Coruña was the place where English and Irish travelers would have come in by boat, but then there was also the main Camino from France, the Camino Frances. So I don't write a huge amount about the Camino in the book, but I do start actually with the Codex Calixtinus, which is one of the earliest travel guides.
It was stolen like a couple of years, well, like a
decade
ago or so.
Yeah, so it's famous for its modern history as well. But it's one of the earliest written travel guides. And it's actually very representative in some ways because it combines spiritual information, religious information, and practical information. And so it's telling the reader both what you should do when you get to Santiago and how you should get there, but it also tells you how to keep safe and how to look after your body and how to avoid wasps and flies and this kind of thing. So the Codex Calixtinus is actually very representative of this struggle between the body and the mind, or the body and the soul, if you like, that travel plays with. I've written about a few other Spanish travelers in the book, and the Spaniards too in the Middle Ages traveled a very long way. I write about the ambassador of Henry III of Castile, Clavijo, who went all the way to Samarcanda and was the ambassador to Timur, Tamerlane.
Maybe he was like the first European to go to that place, maybe.
No, but he was. He's one of the first Europeans to leave a written account of places like Samarkand and Tabriz. And he was very impressed by this because this was then the most sophisticated, wealthy, developed part of the world on the Silk Roads, and made European technology seem very basic. So he talks about the irrigation system and the ice houses and this kind of thing. So the kinds of things that they could have there were things that Europeans had never seen before. And I also write about an anonymous Spanish Franciscan who went around West Africa and North Africa in the 14th century, and that's a very early account of these places, some of which is fictional, some of which seems to be real. So on the one hand, he went to Tenerife and Lanzarote, and that seems to be a kind of accurate account of that. but then nearby he describes ants the size of cats that are mining gold from a mountain, and that's obviously not possible. So the reader has to work out which bits are useful and which bits are more about moral education or geographical education or something like that. And then I also write about Jordan of Severac, or Jordanus Catalanus, who was a Franciscan missionary and bishop in India. And again, he took a very dangerous journey, a very perilous journey, a journey where lots of things went wrong. One that was successful for him in that he was made a bishop in the 1320s in India, but he was part of a whole wave of people, mainly from Spain and Italy, Franciscans and Dominicans, who established European colonies in China and India. And these were religious colonies and merchant colonies, but people reflected on that journey, and they also talked about the things their new experiences. So Jordanus, he talks about his first taste of a mango. And he says, it's indescribably sweet. There aren't words to describe the taste of this fruit. So that language of wonder, of the exotic, of surprise, also foreshadows the colonial period and the kind of attraction and danger that people found in the East.
So it was like an age of exploration before the age of exploration. And for example, Columbus, like when he traveled like to America, well, he thought he was like traveling to China, where Marco Polo had seen like all that marvels, for example.
Yeah, and the book starts with a medieval globe, which shows that if you sail west from Portugal, the first place you will reach is Japan and China, and that made sense to a medieval mind. So I think one of the things I feel very strongly is that my job as a historian is not to point out where medieval people were wrong, but rather to try and understand how they saw the world and experienced the world on their terms, not mine. Because, of course, they didn't know they were medieval. They thought they were up to date. So I think the book is trying really to play with that connection. There are some things which are very recognizable to us and some things which are very alien to us. For example, the shape of the world, that there's no Australia, no Americas, no Antarctica. So that seems to us totally alien. But at the same time, then lots of the experiences, lots of the ambitions, lots of the disappointments, and lots of the humanity. What does it mean to be a human being with a human body? A body which often lets us down or embarrasses us or is difficult in some ways. And so I try and bring those elements to the reader, that medieval people in some ways are very different from us, and in some ways they're very recognizable.
You do, you can feel like the connections. Well, it's been like an absolute pleasure like talking to you at this more or less an hour, and it's been like, I'm really honored, and I'm sure like the readers are going to enjoy this. Una guía de viajes por la Edad Media, el mundo visto por los ojos de los viajeros medievales, librerías a partir del 29 de septiembre, publicado por Ático de los Libros. Os invito a leerlo, pues ya habéis visto qué bien lo cuenta, pues imaginad qué bien lo escribe. Un placer, encantado, y continuamos.
Thank you so much.